for individuals. And this data is collected on people's incomes and spending habits and when you apply for a credit card. So every country has some kind of way that they collect this data. But again, that question of a research scholar saying, can I have all the access to all the people who want the American Express card in my neighborhood? You're not going to get that data, but they have it. So what's happening? Why? Closed data. And what are some of the challenges? So I have this table here that we can look at a high level, and we, could talk about each of these blocks probably for hours because we don't have, I want to say national, let alone international types of standards addressing these challenges, but people are talking about them, and we've been talking about them for a while, and there's now movements to address some of these issues. So one is in the area of policy. There are complex regulations governing the use of data. There's data life cycle challenges, and one of the biggest, I want to say, threats or concerns people is losing control over their data. So industry may want to share data with an academic, like a health organization may want to share their data because maybe the computer scientist or the information retrieval expert wants to try a new algorithm, but they get worried, like, what's going to happen downstream after I share that research data? How do I know they're not going to give it to somebody else who I don't trust? So these policies are very stand as barriers. Another is licensing. I am curious how many people here are familiar with Creative Commons. I would think a lot of people are, or no? Creative Commons, I am curious. So, okay, so Creative Commons, if you haven't heard of that, it's a licensing, an open source licensing that comes out of MIT, but also a whole collective organization. And there are different ways of citing information that's open and shareable and reusable. And specifically for data, there's a license called CC0. And in fact, the Dryad data repository and the cyber infrastructure initiatives that I shared about are using CC0. So when researchers put their data in, they know they're following the CC0 license. But that doesn't address these concerns that I'm talking about sharing restricted data, which we'd like to do because then we can address some really significant challenges facing society. Another one is maybe we could have the policy taken care of and we could have the right licensing and everyone agrees to it, but there are worries about system infrastructure and technical infrastructure and protection. And I think that we've all seen things in the popular press about data breaches, happening in the US with things like election records or Yahoo. That's actually been global and other challenges. So having secure system infrastructure, rights and privacy concern were in the last column. I've already mentioned PII, personal identifying information. I don't know how I feel about my health records being out there in an open repository. But then again, if I could help cure a disease if they had access, maybe I would be okay with it. And the last one, the incentive. Getting people to realize, and it's not just people, it's organizations. We talk about a culture shift that's taken place, which has been a motivator for people sharing data, particularly in the open data community. Just to harken back to Dryad, we used to have these people, I don't know, Holly, if you remember, called our pet depositors. They would deposit through a Dryad journal, and then they would get it, that their data was open and reusable, and they'd get citations. And then they'd go find their other journals, their other articles that they published, and they would get that data and put it in there because they thought, wow, this can help me get tenure, or my research will be known. And so that cultural change has taken place, or is somewhat robust in environments like biology, particularly evolutionary biology, because they have a culture of data sharing. And other communities are sort of more advanced than health. Health is more protective because of the people. So there is incentivizing that still needs to take place. Credit for research and recognition of solving ground challenges. So I think we can agree that data sharing is good. And if we share, I say, everyone gets a piece of the pie, or I should say really the cake, and we can enjoy that cake. But based on that table, that there's a lot of restricted challenges, and involves, when you start dealing with that restricted data, the policies, the PII, the technical challenges, you involve lawyers. And lawyers cost money. So, I have money over there. This is a scenario that happens over and over again in the US. And there's a classic case with MIT and Twitter data and computer science department where everyone was so enthusiastic. Let's share the data. There's a classic case at Drexel very recently with IMS Health, and they wanted to share data with some of our visualization people. This happens over and over again, where everyone says, yes, let's share the data. The lawyers from the industry come to the table, and the lawyers from the university, and get together, let's make this agreement happen so we can share the data. 6 months later, agreement's not signed. 7 months later, maybe the agreement's signed, but you're only getting half the data because everyone starts freaking out that you're going to see the personal identifying information, or they're worried about what's going to happen to the data downstream, so they take some of it. Sometimes a year later, the agreement's not signed. Maybe then they finally sign it, and guess what? The researcher doesn't care anymore. They've moved on. They needed to get tenure. They couldn't be bothered with it. But a lot of money has been spent on the industry lawyer and the university lawyer. And it's a lot of time. It's a huge cost. And it's not only industry and academia. This happens over and over again between government and industry, government and academia, business and, it's just these different partnerships. And it happens over and over again. And it's the same conversation. Yes, sometimes you're successful, but this is a challenge, and this is holding us up to those great pictures and wonderful New York Times and Wired articles and things I showed you about addressing challenges. So I'm part of a research initiative where we have the phrase, trying to move the needle forward to addressing this problem more collectively. So in the US, the National Science Foundation has introduced a way for people to partner and address big data challenges. And they have carved the United States up into 4 regions. There's the Northeast, the Southeast, the Midwest, and the West. And they're calling these clusters Big Data Innovation Hubs. Philadelphia, Drexel University is in Philadelphia, so I'm part of the Northeast Hub. And people get together and try to address challenges in certain areas. There's a group within the Northeast Hub called Data Sharing, and I co-chair this with my colleague Sam Madden, who's at MIT CSAIL, the Computer Science Department. And we are specifically targeting data sharing of closed and restricted data. So this is just the image of the Northeast Hub, and they have this idea of spokes and rings and the way we can work together. You can think of a wheel. Each of the hubs has sort of a different arrangement. So the home of the hub of the Northeast Hub is Columbia University. For the Southeast Hub, they have sort of 2 homes. One is University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the Renaissance Computing Center, and the other is Georgia Tech. Because if you think about the United States globally, the South is more spread out. The West has 4 homes, and the West has 2 homes, sort of Berkeley and University of Washington, and the Midwest has 4 different universities interacting together. So this is just the Northeast. But all of the hubs are also trying to work together too. It's kind of fun. So within the hub, as I said, we have these arrangements of spokes and rings. And Sam Madden, my colleague, and I, together with some other colleagues, are part of a spoke project called a licensing model and ecosystem for data sharing, where we are addressing that problem and trying to move the needle forward. So we have 3 goals to our project. One is to create a licensing framework and generator so that conversation I shared with you that happens between industry and academia over and over again, or government and academia, with the return on investment and trying to come up with this data sharing agreement, we are trying to create a baseline license agreement that could be templated and used over and over again. So that conversation that happens could be captured and shared on some level, like at some baseline level. The next is, there's a system at MIT called Data Hub. It's the infrastructure, the code is in GitHub, and we're building off of that to create what's called data share, a system that allows for the minting of the agreements, but also the security. If you think back to that box where I had privacy, security, and so forth. And then one of the reasons I'm involved is metadata. And early on when we conceptualized the project, it was clear that metadata was going to be really, really important for identifying the data and putting it in this data share, data hub to data share, and searching licenses. But what we have found, much to my pleasure, is that metadata is actually really key to the underlying infrastructure of the system. So I know there are a few computer scientists here. What is always fun for me when I hear my other colleagues talk about it, the collaboration is MIT, the Metadata Research Center, and Brown University Computer Science Department. The computer science guys will say, we can solve 80% of this problem. We can build a system and it will solve it. I say, we're lucky if we can solve 25% of it. So it's kind of interesting to hear that conversation take place. But we continue on. How am I doing on time? I haven't looked. I just need to look. Okay, we're good. I need to have a sip of water, pardon. So if you're interested to find some more details about the project, I'm going to talk a little bit now. I'm going to dig down about some of the metadata work and show you some prototyping on the system, which is a little hard on the eyes, but we are making progress. But I do want to point out that we have a web page for the project at the Metadata Research Center, and you can link there to other talks and presentations and so forth. And we're still updating this page. Okay, so one of our first steps in addressing this grand challenge of sharing restricted data was, yes, have a workshop. So we got together last fall at Drexel University, and we had 50-some people from industry, government, academia, and sciences. We had people from Amazon, people from, I don't know if you folks are familiar with Experian, that's a credit rating industry. We had IMS Health. We had Independence Blue Cross. Those are 2 big health insurance. We had GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. They do pharmaceutical. We have people from these agencies really interested in ways to improve data sharing with academia. We had representatives from government. So we had this is US focus, it's NSF. So pardon, because this is an international audience, but I think it's important to share. We had Department of Defense, we had NIH, National Institutes of Health, we had NSF, we had Department of Energy representatives, and then we had a lot of people, since this is a Northeast Hub project, we had a lot of people from universities in the Northeast Hub, and we had both librarians and computer scientists and faculty in the sciences. And then we also had representatives from the other big data hubs, because we're all trying to work together also because of this arrangement. So we had representatives from the West and the Midwest and the Southeast hub. And we spent 2 days together. And how we started out is in this topic of, we called it war stories, or stories from the trenches. And we had representatives from industry and academia talk about data sharing cases of restricted data that fell apart, that problem when it goes bad. And we had them identify why it went wrong and what would have made it work. So what would have reversed the outcome? And we had people talk about data sharing scenarios that worked out and what they thought made it successful, so we could learn from those experiences. And then we brainstormed what would be next steps to feed into our conceptualization of the Spoke project that I shared about. And so some of the main takeaways were that we needed to collect agreements, those agreements that are worked on by lawyers from industry and academia or government that show successful sharing of restricted data. What do those agreements look like, and what can we learn from them? Can we find some similarities? So that was number one. Number two was that we needed to build a trusted platform. So we felt kind of good that we had the data hub system that we were moving forward on. And you know, I don't know if it's because it was at Drexel and the Metadata Research Center was behind this, but this is where people kind of went, wow, yeah, metadata is not just about describing the data. It has to be really key to the underlying infrastructure. And so for 2 days, we had these talks, and we got in breakout groups and stuff, and we had, you know, people, I don't know how many of you have been in these interactive groups where you post up ideas around, you know, whiteboarding and Post-its. But I kind of like this one because I didn't write it, but somebody else wrote, Jane, ontology. We needed an ontology for the project. And so here's some of our outcomes. And if you want to know more, we did publish a report, which we put in our institutional repository, that summarizes this whole event. There's slides to all the talks, and you can learn more about it if you're interested. But this helped us move forward, and so some of the early stage work then that I want to share with you was our work in gathering those data sharing agreements. That's where we've started, and our current analysis and clustering and so forth. So now I'm going to dig down a little bit, not too much in the metadata area, but I think given the kinds of work we do in digital libraries, this helps us to see implications of this, solving this problem, and where we as a community might fit. So with the data sharing agreements, and actually I need to update that number, we now have 32 data sharing agreements that represent successful sharing between industry and academia or government and academia in restricted environments. And I have to say that it's almost like we needed a data sharing agreement to get the data sharing agreements. So we reached out to whoever was willing to listen, people from the workshop, university offices of sponsored research, saying, can you share any agreements from data sharing that involve sensitive data? And we reached out to industry. And at first, we always get this, yeah, well, I can share. You know, a week later, I get an email, oh, I don't think I can share it. You know, it's restricted. So the data sharing agreements themselves, people are like worried. And the way that we got them is very interesting. Sometimes some of the universities were willing to share. So like at Brown University, because of one of our PIs, they were like, yeah, here's 3. You know, no problem. They didn't black out anything. My own university, they were like obsessed. They went through and blacked out everything, the name of the industry. Then they shared the agreement. We've had some of the data sharing agreements come to us from a colleague. I can't identify who he is, but he said, here, I'm sharing these, but don't tell anybody. So we got some of them that way. And we are actively trying to build up this collection of data sharing agreements. But we have enough that we started to see similarities, and we've been mining them and looking for them, and that's where the content analysis and the clustering and the metadata labeling work has come in to help us understand what makes it successful. And so where we are here is we have, we're referring to this as an ontology or a top-level data infrastructure, and we have 6 top-level classes. And I'd really like to credit Sam Grabus, who's a doctoral student who's been on this project, who's done a lot of this work. And so you can see the 6 areas, the top areas that reflect some of the ideas that I've been already talking about. So thinking about privacy, access, responsibility, compliance, and so forth. And she actually has a paper that she's going to be presenting at the MTSR, that's the Metadata Semantics Research Workshop. But I think it's a little hard to keep looking at this and this. But what we do in each of those 6 areas, if we've gone down further, and then we've thought about how we can create an underlying ontology of the system and what's the way to capture the workflow in working on a data sharing agreement with restricted data. So ultimately, we have over 90 attributes that we're putting into an ontology. Here's just another one, which is the data handling. And you know, the life cycle issue all the way to termination, what happens when the data sharing agreement is over? Can the data be destroyed? You know, is it preserved, and so forth. And so with the 90 attributes, we're in this process right now, which we're calling ontologizing, where we're putting this into a way to help automate the data hub system that I talked about before. So this has been a lot of work, and whenever I present on this, I say, if you have any data sharing agreements that you can share with us, we'd like to look. We haven't really ventured into the international area, but I think we should recognize that many of the industries that want to share data are international. So how do we address that is going to come up. Okay, so the other things we've done is we've done a little bit of mining. We've done the content analysis in a manual way, looking at them. We've done some mining, looking at words and parsing them. So we've taken words in looking through these licenses or agreements or contracts, or some people call them non-disclosure agreements, and putting in words like privacy and PII and restrictions, and getting a sense of how these phrases are captured in these agreements. And this is a newer piece, and I know it's kind of hard. Hold on a second. Where we've done some automatic coloring of words and frequency and so forth. So here we just took the word privacy